Hi, welcome to Healing Humanity. I want to talk to you today about something that weighs on my heart pretty heavy, and it has for a long, long time. So, when I start to read the Bible related to women, there's a lot of confusion, right? I'm sure you felt it too. Some of Paul's verses are, to say the least, difficult to understand. So, I've done a lot of research on that, trying to figure out, who Paul truly was, what his what his ultimate motives were in relation to women. And I did read a book written by a woman, actually. I don't remember the name of it, but she did a lot of studies on Paul, and he was somebody that actually tried to help women. Like when he introduced Phoebe, he introduced her as someone of equal character to him. He introduced her as a benefactor and a deacon in the church. So it doesn't make sense, right? Why would Paul say women are not allowed to speak in church, where he's introducing Phoebe as a deacon of the church? She obviously is speaking in the church, where he says a woman shall not lead a man, whereas she is leading, she is pastoring. And he full well was aware of that. So why is there two different thought processes coming from him? Well, the book that I read, the woman that wrote this book said that Paul was actually discussing the behavior within the church itself. So a lot of people were speaking in tongues, which is okay. The Bible states that it's a gift, and that's wonderful. But it's not okay if you are speaking in church, disrupting services, and not having an interpreter there, or not interpreting what you're bringing in to the rest of the congregation. All that was noise to everyone else. Nobody understood what these women were saying, and they could get, I'm sure, they could get pretty loud, I would imagine. And I imagine that what they were doing was pretty disruptive to the actual service and the message of whatever priest or pastor was up at the pulpit. So, I could see where he would get frustrated with that and state that, women need to remain silent in church. And if you're looking for guidance, apparently there was always a curtain between the male and the female's parishioners, and the women would yell across the curtain to speak to their a man or something, to ask for guidance or ask one another for guidance. And he said, women, get your guidance at home from your husband, not during service, not interrupting the pastor, not yelling across the curtain to try to understand what's actually being said. And so I could fully see that that would be the reason that Paul would, just shut down certain behaviors. But it wasn't a general, you know, subjugation, or, an act of control to stop women from speaking, stop women from leading. They absolutely can. But they need to do it in a right way, in a right manner, a respectful manner. They can't just take over service and start, willy-nilly throwing things out, for the congregation. It has to be a controlled, respectful environment when you were sitting in the pews at church. And it doesn't have to be a control of men. It can be a control of a woman at the pulpit. But it has to be that, it has to be a service where everybody can spend that time to try to understand what the message is that's being shared with them. Can you imagine if you're sitting next to somebody and they're constantly yelling out? And I don't mean just a little here and there. That's great, fine. It helps the pastors to be able to feel the energy of the room. But when they're constantly doing it, wouldn't you think that that's pretty annoying? When they're constantly speaking in tongues and you have no idea what they're doing, you can't understand what they're saying. They're having that moment with God. Great for them, but everybody else is like, do that at home, right? If it's disruptive, do it at home. Uh, and so I just feel like over time, those passages have been used to really cause a control to take over. That men have used those passages as a form of um, forced obedience to the church, and to act as if they are a conquest of theirs, that they can control and take their freedom from them, their ability to connect to God from them. And what I find strange about that is in Jeremiah, and you won't hear about this verse, but in Jeremiah 31:22 it says, and he was one of the major prophets for the time. He said, "The Lord will create a new thing on earth. A woman will surround a man." I'm just throwing it out there. Is it possible? I think so. Don't you? I just feel like men don't have the right anymore to keep women enslaved to this hierarchical structure. It's not necessary. In fact, it's extremely oppressive, and that needs to stop. It needs to change. And there's only a few groups that adhere to this kind of situation in the churches. And I'm speaking to you because it's a man-made system. It is not a God-based system. God created men and women equally. He created woman from a man, yes, but in the image of God. He created them equal in the image of themselves. And you can read into that however you like. I just feel like this hierarchical system is old. And why does it weigh on my heart? Because it has been the guiding disturbance in my life for a number of years now, where because I was not married and I was not chosen to be in a relationship and married about 10 years ago or 8 years ago, when all of this chaos started, that I was not worthy. And that is so far from the truth. When you judge somebody for something that happened 35 years ago, when it is something that you yourselves have done, doesn't that make you a hypocrite? And you can go by the verses that Paul shared, or you can start to enlighten yourself. You can start to see what's happening around you. You can start to open your mind to what's true, what's real, what's God, and what's man. Because Jeremiah 31:22, when he states that God is the Lord will create a new thing on earth, ask yourself, is that happening? Could that possibly be happening right now? I believe so. Peter once said that women don't deserve the life. I think he's changed his mind. At least I hope so. There's shadows of control that are permeating our churches and, honestly, our lives. And, right now, when these groups, this hierarchical structure, they'll go so far as to assess a woman and her financial value if she is an inheritor of a great wealth, or if she is an inheritor of a business, or is running a business that is growing exponentially. They will send a I want to say contracted, but perhaps not. They will send in a man to marry her. So ultimately, the wealth stays within this group. Ultimately, The woman may run the business, the woman may, put in the time and the energy, but who's going to get it at the end? The husband, if she passes first. So I just feel like we're running systems that no longer apply anymore. And why did this first begin? I'm not sure. But there are tests of God, and somebody said, well, it's awfully quiet in heaven, and if they let women in, it won't be quiet anymore. Well, that's not true. That is so far from the truth, and it's so bigot based that that just infuriates me. There seems to be even glass ceilings for heaven, and in order to break through, you have to get through these control systems, these patriarchal hierarchies that have been built, and they are so strong and they are so abundant, and they run so many things in this world. But it is time to start looking at yourselves and look at what God is actually doing in the world. And I know that you think, some of you think that if you're able to build these systems over all these years, then God approves of them. You're right. He did. But that's changed. That's ultimately changed. He would not have woken me up if that was not to change. I can guarantee you that. Part of the reason that I am here is to make sure that these kinds of systems are broken down, are stopped. Will I succeed? I don't know. It's up to God what he wants to do with all this. But I can tell you that, part of the reason that I'm here is to make sure that that glass ceiling gets broken once and for all. That there's an equal treatment under the laws and world of God. That there's an ethical balance and a development of truth throughout our lives. That everyone take personal responsibility and not build a system of decay and control and deceit and harm and violence and control. We all need to show self-control. We all need to show self-knowledge and an inner growth through our walk with God. And if you are counting on a man or a group, doesn't even have to be a man, if you're counting on a group of people to guide your steps, to guide your knowledge, to guide your actions, then you're no better than the Pharisees. You're no better than the Jews and the Gentiles in the time of Jesus, where they were just looking for a king. We haven't changed. Don't you think it's time for change? We all have a duty to go through the tests of God. We go through lack, we go through suffering, we go through praise. Can you handle the praise without becoming too big-headed for it? Too vain, too self-absorbed. God will send you through affluence to see how you handle it. Are you a good steward of funds that he shares with you and things that are shared with you? You are sent through spiritual warfare, which can be so frightening, but is not when you know you're walking with God. He tests your obedience to his word, obedience to his guidance. And you're tested on whether you will withdraw once you attain everything that you have looked to obtain. And I don't know why these hierarchical systems think that women can't handle these tests. If you think about the way that things have gone in my life in the last 10 years, I think I passed your tests. Not once, not twice, not even 3 times. I passed your tests 10 times over, maybe more. I've literally been tested since I was 7 years old. There's probably nothing you could throw at me that I have not already gone through. Spiritually, emotionally. It's time for all of us to open our eyes. It's time for the forced obedience to end. It's time for the overarching controls to stop. You know, there's groups out here that I see that there's groups that want women to be self-sufficient and to not need a man, and you know, simply want them to be there, not have to need them to be there. I was that person. So then there's this other group that wants to control, wants to beat down, wants to subjugate, and to just force them into humility and submission, because that's what makes them feel powerful. That's what they think is needed in the world. You know, I watched this one girl. I worked with her on the island in Michigan, and boy, I'll tell you, that poor little thing, she came from some other country. She came to work, and she had a job in the kitchen. It wasn't a fabulous job, but she'll definitely make a lot of money. She'll get a lot of hours. And she was just a young little thing, and she had just had a child. I don't think the child was more than a year old. I could be wrong about that. I know it was definitely less than 2. And the husband stayed at home to care for the child and sent her off to this other country to work. And he's there taking care of the child, and she missed that child so much. And that is the type of person that I'm talking about, that was ugly and controlling and dismissive and nasty. That poor girl worked herself to the bone, tried so hard. She wanted to be back with her child so desperately, but couldn't because he wouldn't let her, supposedly. And in her culture, obviously, things were a little bit different, and she really did listen to whatever he was sharing and telling her, but she wound up giving herself a mini stroke. I saw her in the lunchroom one afternoon, and her whole face was like half of her face was numb, and she was drooling, and her eye was just watering, and just, it was like she was crying, but she didn't know she was crying because she couldn't feel that side of her face. I believe, and I don't know, it was not proven, but I believe it was the stress. Just the undue, unjust, horrible stress that this woman had to go through. Because of this group that thinks that humbleness and control and forced submission is a better way. It's never been a better way. It's never been a better way, ever. It causes a lot of anger. It causes a lot of upheaval and uprise. And it always has. I just think that we have to really look at where the world has gone and how we want it to go in the future. And we have to come together. We have to. Because we can't keep going the way that it is. Not at all. And I'm going to share that verse with you one more time. Jeremiah 31:22. The Lord will create a new thing on earth. A woman will surround a man. Keep healing, friends.